It's episode 98 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com, and there you can subscribe to the show. And if you do, please leave a comment on iTunes. It helps other people find the show. Also, I would like for you to check out our sponsors this week. Nick Cole had dropped a brand new story just yesterday in his weird universe, and head over to nickcolebooks.com and check it out. You can't go wrong with anything Nick does. I'm a super fan. I think you will be too. Also, Stefan Bolt's story, The Traveler, is an excellent tale. If you're looking for some weekend reading, pick it up. I think you'll be blown away by it. I'm a huge fan of Stefan, just like Nick, and this story is one of those that reaches in, grabs you by the heart, but also leaves you a little shaken at what can be. This is The Traveler by Stefan Boltz. Also, check out thirdscribe.com. If you're an author, the team there can help you set up a web presence that will keep you connected with your audience, and it takes all of the fuss out of being a computer genius. Let them handle all that stuff for you and free you up to do what you do best, and that's write stories. It's thirdscribe.com. Now on to this special bonus episode with author Jason Anspach. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I have a very exciting guest on the show with me. Jason Anspach is someone that I've gotten to know over the last, couple of years on the Facebook and different social media type situations. Jason is a phenomenal author, and he released a book, I guess it was last fall, called Till Death. Jason will clear that up for us in just a minute. That I thought was one of the most interesting and unique books that I'd read in quite some time. So Jason and I have been trying to get him lined up to come on the podcast for a while, and I was thankful that he has a follow-up coming out, and it was a perfect time for us to get together and chat some about writing. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Yes, I made it.
You've actually been on the show before, haven't you?
Well, that doesn't count. That was on a panel.
Right.
That doesn't count. I was there because I hang out with Nick Cole sometimes.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Nick has helped a lot of careers.
Oh, man. And just a phenomenal guy, you know? Yeah. Nick is one of those guys that I don't know how many times I've emailed him for a piece of advice or, and that's an ambulance going down the road apparently in the background, if you heard that. Nick is just one of those guys that's always there, always available, and such a sweet guy. But we're not talking about Nick today. We're talking about Jason Anspach. Jason,
no more Nick talk.
No more Nick. Sorry, Nick. You know the drill, Jason. I start each show with a variation of the same question. That question is, how did you first know that you wanted to be a writer or storyteller?
Right. So I think like a lot of people, I wanted to do it from a young age, or at least a lot of your guests that I've heard. In the 5th grade, we did one of those yearbooks where it wasn't pictures, it was just kind of like a facsimile, like a printout. And they asked us questions, sort of like surveys. And then you write your 5th grade answer and talk about Ninja Turtles and everything else that's important to you. And
right.
One of them was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote an author and a baseball player. So I'm batting 500. And that's pretty good. That's better than Ted Williams.
Absolutely.
But
go ahead.
For me, I love to write and I love to read, but I really, really enjoy telling stories. And I've found throughout my life, I've always gravitated toward that, whether it's playing tabletop games when I was younger, or when I had kids, just spending time just making up stories for their enjoyment. I love to create stories, and they've always been in my mind, and I finally decided I'm going to start writing these down and see if I can't do something with it, and thankfully it's taken off.
Now, you have a large family like I do, and you're one of the few people that I know that has a larger family than I do. But I can remember as my kids, when my kids were younger, mine are a little bit older now. My oldest is about to be 21, and my youngest is about to be 12.
Right.
So, a lot of our reading bedtime stories and stuff like that. A lot of those days are over
Mhm.
in our house. But it is sad. It's very sad. But I remember, sitting in the living room and having all the kids around and reading, stuff like Little House on the Prairie and whatever, and embellishing those stories. I would always, create character voices and all of the stuff, and then I would have, Laura Ingalls, going on side quests and, and stuff like that.
Leveling up,
and that was some of the, like you said, it was some of the most fun, innocent, the most creative times. It's when you just kind of let your guard down and you have nothing to lose, and those are some of the most creative times. How has your family affected your creativity and your pursuit of writing?
Right. Well, I think, and you can speak to this because you've got a son who's very creative and has written some books himself, but when you're being creative with your family, especially when you're reading to them, it's so important to read to your family, read to your kids. They benefit and grow from it so much. You start to see their creativity get sparked. So for me, you get an insight into a child's mind. There's that innocence and that wonder and that sort of can-do attitude that children have, and that's inspiring for me. When I sit down to write, and then one of my kids sits down and says, "I'm going to write a book too," and they start writing a story. It's just a great feeling. You're seeing a positive impact, and you're seeing them use their minds and use their imaginations. And I think in our society, we get driven to a point where we consume a lot of creativity, but our actual imaginations individually and our creation gets kind of dulled down. It gets hammered down, and people lose that ability to create. I think everyone has it innately as a child, and I think growing that and cultivating that is huge. And it reminds me that I need to keep it up myself.
Well, sure, and like everything, when you take in more that you need and don't put out as much as you need, you get slothful and fat and lazy, and that not only applies to food, but that applies to we live in a society where we're constantly feeding on entertainment and every variation of story that you could possibly imagine, from television to movies. And even with something that I dearly love, which is my Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, some nights I'll just lay in bed and I'll just browse through the Kindle store and I'll say, well, I'd like to read that, and I'd like to read that, and I'd like to read that. And an hour later, I haven't read anything. I'm just sitting there browsing, looking at all the stuff to read,
Right.
So yeah, we live in an awesome time, but at the same time, we have to be extremely careful to put that stuff aside and actually flex those muscles.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I've been in that point where you've got a really flabby mind because you're just watching TV or watching movies, and we actually took the cable out of our house for that reason, just to say, you know what, we're not even going to have this as a crutch to go to. We have to be really deliberate about wanting to watch media. But honestly, that's one of the reasons why I can write, is because I don't have those distractions every day.
Exactly. Being deliberate about what you do, that's a crucial tool in your tool chest for sure.
Yeah.
But let's backtrack a little bit. We jumped forward.
Sure.
So as a kid, you wanted to be a writer. You wanted to tell stories. Like you said, a lot of guests do have that ambition, and they say that from an early age that they found that to be true. But then another common thread, another common theme is that people get weighed down with stuff and the pursuit of career and all of that stuff, and that that kind of gets pushed to the side. How did you, as you grew older, and of course started pursuing your career and had a family and all that, how do you keep that spark alive while you have to do things to provide for the family and stuff?
Yeah, right. Well, and there were times where that spark, was really kind of a smoking flax. It wasn't
right.
It wasn't burning very strong. And I shifted from wanting to be an author to I wanted to be George Lucas after I grew up a little bit, and I was going to go to film school and move down to California and do all that. And I got married, and my priorities instantly changed. You do reach a point when you start a family where you have to live for others, and you have to be,
right.
In the role of a servant. And when you have children, that only grows. So, you build your career, but it was a desire to be creative and write and just put something out there, put my thoughts, put my ideas out there. That just sort of stayed, and it reached a point where entertaining people with just sort of tales by the campfire, or entertaining the kids by, like you said, embellishing the stories, adding to it, making Papa Bear develop a split personality when you're reading the Berenstain Bears, things like that, just weren't enough. And I said, I've got 1,000 stories in my head. I'm going to just start writing them down.
Yeah. Is this something that you talked with your wife about?
Yeah, and she was awesome. She was very supportive, and she said, she was telling me, you've got so many ideas that just float in your mind, and I don't know, I'm a little frightened. I don't know why you have all these thoughts. It's almost like you have a split personality, but you totally should start writing them down and develop them. And I think that's the big stepping stone, or at least it was for me. It was going from taking these things that are sort of shower thoughts, or, oh, this would make a neat story. I would always say, it'd be a good movie, or, it'd be a good book, and then I'd lay out a plot, and then that's where it ended. But taking those and then developing them and refining them is what brought me to the next level. And then having the encouragement, seeing success in the indie community with people like Michael Bunker and Hugh Howey, and kind of being able to say, I think everyone has that moment where you say, I can do this, not to say I'm better than these people, but you realize I can do this. This is something I can do. And once I had that moment, it actually came right after I read Bunker's Pennsylvania. I went all in.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have had that sort of moment where there's this spark, and like you said, it's kind of a smoking flax, and it's just barely alive, but it doesn't take much. A gentle breeze blows by, and you see that fire stoke up. But
yeah,
what did you settle on as your career?
So my day job I ended up going into a transportation company, and I became a director of pricing, and I did marketing and things like that. So I majored in public relations in college, and so I found one of those jobs with a small to mid-sized business where it's sort of like, who knows how to do this? And you raise your hand and say, okay, you do that now too. So I ended up doing a lot of number crunching, a lot of marketing, a lot of PR, and management and things like that. And that's, those are all life experiences, so I'm thankful for all those. So that's sort of what pays the bills. And then everyone's surprised that, the guy in the office who's directing a lot of financial stuff is also the guy who's writing books in his spare time.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have had that. You kind of feel like a superhero. You walk in the office and you're looking side-eyed everybody, and like, if you only knew what I do at night.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Oh man. So what was the first idea that you had that you said, okay, this is a great story idea. You've kind of had that spark of inspiration where you say, what, I think I can do this. But what's that first idea that you had that you said, okay, this is going to be the one that I pursue to the end, and I'm going to see this thing fully realized and fleshed out?
Yeah, it's funny because most of what I wrote while I was kind of getting together was in the science fiction genre. So I had almost a complete book called Cascadia, which was set kind of in a dystopian future in the Pacific Northwest, and I was writing that, and I thought, okay, this will be it. And I read a lot of sci-fi, read a lot of fantasy. It's always interested me. I'm a big Star Wars fan. Those things have always been there, so I kind of just naturally assumed that's the direction I would go. And then I started working on a short story that was a little bit of a horror story, just for fun, because it was a spooky story I told the kids that they liked, and I said I can expand this. And then my wife's mother died, and as we were going through the grieving process, anyone who's lost a family, and especially in a religious context, you talk a lot about the person being in a better place. You talk about a lot of those things, and yet there's still that grief that comes with losing someone.
Right.
And I start to think, well, what would happen if what we're saying we just felt all the time? Like, we believe, yes, you're in a better place, but if we felt it so surely, and it was such a commonplace thing, like as if someone moved to another state, that's how people responded to death. And I thought, how would that happen? And the answer, well, if people died and came back as regularly, and there's just no doubt about it, the attitude towards death would be very different.
Yeah. And
in my world, it became kind of a flippant attitude, and maybe that's just being cynical. But the characters in the book are kind of like, "Oh, you died? Well, yeah, that happens," and that's how it goes. It's just the next step, which we a lot of us believe it is, but we still grieve strongly. So that idea really took a hold of me, and I started writing this detective story about Sam Rockwell, who's doesn't know how to be a detective, but he's read a lot of books. He's read a lot of pulp fiction, and
you're right.
He's read The Maltese Falcon, so he tries to emulate that. And his specialty is working with returns, and these are the ghosts that have died and they have unfinished business. His father gets murdered, and Sam takes the case and kind of tries to bluff his way into a police procedural and solve a mystery that kind of goes down deeper and gets tied into the Soviet Cold War. It's set in the 1950s. And that's kind of what happened. It just kept going, and then it resonated with its audience.
I love the idea of taking taking something that so easily gets reduced to platitudes and cliche. That they're in a better place. We'll see them again one day.
Right.
We've all heard those. We've all experienced those. We've probably all said those things to other people.
Sure.
And though we believe that, sometimes it's easy, like you said, to get flip with it and to not really take the time to absorb what that means.
Right.
And I love the idea of taking those concepts, those platitudes, those things that could so easily be empty words, and putting flesh on those and allowing yourself to really get inside that concept and start playing around with what that would actually mean. I truly love that idea.
Thank you.
And when I read Till Death, it's a very fast read. It's a very you have a very unique style that when I was reading it first, I was like, oh man, this is phenomenal. This is taking several genres, twisting them up, turning them on their head, and just having total fun with it.
Right.
But I also understood that this probably was coming from a place of some sort of grief that was being kind of processed. So I definitely picked up on that, and I love the way that writing fiction can mean so many things to other people, but it especially means something to the writer that may or may not come across to the reader. Do you have any thoughts on that about the writer using the book to process things and how it becomes something other when it goes out into the world?
Oh yeah. Writing is very, very therapeutic, to the point that I think even if you had no aspirations to publish your work, if you were to just sit down and write on a subject that you're dealing with, you'll find yourself working through it so much better than if you're just kind of trying to distract yourself from whatever you're going through. I have a draft of Till Death, actually, that's really dark, and really that was the other way that the story could have gone. Kind of a dark, hey, this is what happens. It's an ugly world, and that sort of side of the coin. And I probably wrote about half the book. I outlined a full book and wrote about half of it, and I stopped and I said, this isn't fun. This isn't what I want. If I'm going to write a book, maybe it's going to be the only thing I write, and I want people to see a different side of how I process things and a different side of me. And so I started thinking, what do I really want? And what I wanted was, I wanted to be able to capture that feeling you get when you watch an old movie. You watch, say, like Meet Me in St. Louis or Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, that kind of joyful, happy, this is a nice feeling. And so I rewrote the whole book with that style in mind, and it kind of took off. I've heard, and I tried to do this, but I've heard that it feels like you're reading an old Cary Grant movie, right. And that's what I wanted.
Well, when I first got it and started reading it, in the very beginning, I said, oh, this is going to be kind of a Dresden Files type thing, which I absolutely adore. I love love the Dresden Files, and my son Ian does too. We're just complete Jim Butcher geeks. And I love that he has this whole magical world, but the whole thing is set on a detective who is very low tech, and so you have all these detective novel qualities about it that I think that the detective novel is something that is very ill represented right now, and I had that same kind of joy going into this, and then a couple pages in, I said, well, this is not that at all, but I love it just the same. It definitely has that Maltese Falcon kind of Bogart kind of quality, but with a very snappy dialogue. I'm a huge fan, so I'll just put it at that. So when you first wrote it, it was kind of dark, and you said, okay, I need to flip this over.
Yeah.
Did that come easily to you when you kind of got, okay, this is the essence of what this book is? Did it flow from there?
Yeah, that's what happens to me every single time in anything I've ever done. When I get on the wrong path, the way I'll know it is because I can't write it, or I don't feel like writing it anymore. And so days will go by and I haven't touched it, and that's the realization. There's something wrong with the story, and that's why I almost feel like it's instinctive, but that's why I feel like I can't get there. You just labor to write 500 words. And then when I fix the problem, I just burn right through it. And so when I committed to just starting from scratch and rewriting with a different feel, as soon as I did that, the keyboard just caught fire, and it just went and went and went.
Now, that is a unique observation for a fairly new writer to come to. That's a mistake I think a lot of us make in the beginning, is that we hold this thing so precious, that our idea is the best idea it could ever be, and this cannot be that other thing because it's this thing. How did you? What kind of attitude did you have when you realized, okay, I'm writing the wrong book, and you have to kill your darlings, so to speak, and start over? Does that's a hard decision for a fairly new writer to come to?
Yeah, it is, and I mean, it helped in that I wasn't happy with how the characters were. Sam, who in the real book, in the finished book, is kind of a happy-go-lucky mix of Bob Hope and Jimmy Stewart, and he was the quintessential kind of generic, stereotypical hard-boiled detective, just gruff and once I changed him around to not be someone who already is jaded and in the know, but to be someone who's just trying to find his way and do this, and he's doing it by watching other people, I fell in love with his character, and then all the characters end up playing off of that main protagonist, and you really start to enjoy them as well. So it was hard because of the work, because of saying, is this a mistake? Do I not know what I'm doing? But then it becomes really easy because it's right and it feels right. I know that there's a lot of people that put out books and kind of have the anyone can write and you just have to follow a formula mentality. But I still think that there's a certain amount of magic in writing. I think we're reflecting a creativity that is created in us when we write, and I think it comes out when you're on the right path.
I think so too. I think you always have to sit down with the idea that what I'm doing is magic, and I'm creating worlds out of nothing.
Yeah.
And this is my God-given gift to be a creator as well, and that's something that should be held in great esteem, but also realize the fun that there is in that, and that there's no telling what this book will do. That's right. A great observation.
Yeah, and
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think I necessarily knew, the lesson that we're talking about at the time. It just sort of happened. And It was as I wrote more that I realized, okay, this is what's happening. As I wrote more and as I talked to more experienced authors, and that's what's so great about the community that we're in, the willingness of people who have been around the block to talk to the up-and-comers is amazing, unlike anything else.
And isn't that true that that when you get to the end of something, sometimes you are as much in awe of what the book became as you know the reader will be, because you look back and you say, this is not what I expected it to be. Wow, where did this come from? And it's in those moments that you're like, oh, okay, this is something special really happened here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that I think in both of our writing we've seen. I've read reviews for your books, say like Mulligan, where people are just out and out saying, this really touched me. I really appreciated this message. And I don't think, if you're like me, I don't think you sat down and said, well, here's the message I'm going to write. Everyone's going to know that this is the way to think and this is how to feel about that. And yet there it is. And that is
absolutely
a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, because everybody's read a book that you can tell, okay, the author started with an agenda.
Yeah.
And this is so ham-fisted and so in your face.
Those are the worst.
And nobody wants to read that, but it's so, but you can definitely tell at the end of the book, okay, this is something the author discovered. And he's just allowing me to look in with him, and that's where real magic happens, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So speaking of reviews, Till Death was very well received. A lot of people loved the story. It's got a 4.9 out of 5-star average.
I was happy for that.
On Amazon. Yeah. What was it like to? I'm always fascinated by the idea of putting something out to the world and you're just completely naked, so to speak, and you're offering this thing. And man, I really hope people like it. I hope people don't just skewer me for it,
Right.
What was that feeling like for you?
Yeah, I mean, you hit publish for the first time and then you think, oh, have I made a terrible mistake? Have I put something out that's just awful? And then I started to hear back from authors that I respected, like you, E.E. Georgie, Nick Cole, and they're saying, this is actually really good. And I'm thinking, wow, well, really? Okay, great. You're speechless because you have these dreams like, oh, maybe this will just take off and everyone will love it and I'll be a huge famous author while you're writing it and while it's sort of protected. But then once it's out there, you start to think about, well, this could go sideways. I might, my wife might be humoring me, and I might just be awful at this, and everyone's just going to let me know, you stink, never do this again, 1 star. That didn't happen, and I'm thankful for it. And it grows your confidence, and you need to stay humble at the same time.
Sure.
You don't want to get, I don't want to get a swelled head and think I know what I'm doing all the time, and every choice I make is right, because that's not the case. But it's amazing. It's freeing. I think being an indie author allows you to experience a sort of pioneer spirit where you go out and you make something yourself and it succeeds and you can kind of say, wow, I did that. By the grace of God, I did that. Right.
And reviews are all wonderful, and of course you want people to buy the book. You want people to tell you that I like the story and I'm going to give it so many stars. Whatever, all that's great, and that encourages the author. And we really want readers to do those things. We want them to buy the book and leave reviews. But there's nothing more amazing and gratifying, humbling than getting a personal note from someone that says, I really needed this story right now. This is something that really touched me. That means more to an author than you could ever imagine. And I'm really happy that I did not write my first book in my 20s. I'm really glad I waited and matured some myself, learned some things in life, and then published. A lot of our friends, kind of had their writing careers, started in their late 30s, early 40s, or to mid 40s, and I think that's pretty close for you.
I'm 120 years old, actually.
That's exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
Are you glad that you didn't have the kind of writing success that you dreamed of when you were much younger?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that you're completely right. Experiencing things in life. There are people who have a level of empathy and wisdom that allows them at a young age to just capture the human spirit and capture people's imaginations. And those people are real talents. But
Right.
I think when you have someone that hasn't experienced certain things, it can kind of come across in their writing. And sometimes, sometimes you write campy, or you write kind of an action adventure story where the emotion and the development of the character isn't central. It's more about the action, and you can do just fine. But I think if I would have tried to write what I wrote in Till Death when I was 20, it would have been more like The Naked Gun or something like that, where maybe you get some laughs out of it, but I don't think it would have resonated the same way because I didn't have the wisdom to make it resonate that way.
Right. Till Death has a phenomenal cover that really brings out the feel and the spirit of the book. Who did your cover?
That was M.S. Corley. So Mike Corley, who's just an amazing cover artist. And we live not that far apart. He's in Oregon, I'm in Washington, and we've become friends since I first reached out to him. I just liked his art style, looking over his portfolio, and so I said, "Would you do a cover for me?" And he quoted me, and it wasn't cheap, but it was the right guy for the job. And a lot of the influencers that I had, like Michael Bunker and Nick Cole, a lot of the people I talked to really stressed the importance of quality and integrity and professionalism. So it was, you're going to put something out with your name behind it. And that means you first need to put your very best effort into your writing. You can't rush it. You can't put it out half done. You can't put it out with a bunch of errors just because you want to be able to say, hey, look, I'm an author. I think there's a lot of people who are in love with being authors more than they like actually writing and crafting a good work.
Yeah.
And then that sounds pretentious, like I'm, some snooty art house guy. But I think there are a lot of people that love the lifestyle and just want to be able to say, I'm an author too.
Well, sure. And there's, like you alluded to earlier, there's definitely a camp. This is different people have different goals.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just put it that way.
Sure,
and there's it's absolutely legitimate to say, you know what, I'm going to write pulpy, campy books that have an audience, and this is for strictly entertainment purposes.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Know your audience, know what you're putting out, and be honest with your audience, and crank that stuff out. There's an audience for that, but embrace that.
Yeah, but I was going to say, but there's people who write pulpy, campy books, and it's pulp and it's camp, but it's done magnificently.
Exactly.
There are guys like Daniel Smith,
yes,
who just put out amazing work, and the fact that it's pulp doesn't matter because he's just a talented author and he puts his best into it.
Right.
But then there's people that just say, I'm going to string some sentences together, put it up on KU,
right,
and I'm just going to do this on repeat, and just by sheer volume try to put something out there. And that's what I didn't want my name to be attached to.
Exactly. And the fact is those things don't last very long because people find the gimmick, and the gimmick only lasts so long.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely. But yeah, so the cover, what was the process like working with Mike to bring that vision out?
Yeah, he's a lifesaver for me because that was my first release, and if you get traditionally published, they handle all that for you. So I told him straight up, I said, I don't know what to look for. I'm not sure how this process goes. And he just helped me through the whole thing. He said, well, here's how I typically do it. And, Mike's done covers for Nick Cole. He's done covers for Hugh Howey. He's done a lot of covers for a lot of big names.
Right.
And so he just kind of laid out, here's what I usually look for. He asked me all the questions directly. He kind of made this big question list, said, here's what a lot of people know to ask or know to tell me. I'm just going to ask you, and then you can fill in the info. So I filled it all out, and then he gave me four or five fantastic designs, and that was harder than writing the book. Choosing the cover was harder than writing the book with the work that he put out. So we settled on that one, the cover that's in place, because I felt like it really captured the kind of humor and quirkiness of the book, and it had a strong sort of 1950s, early 1960s vibe to it, which was important to demonstrate when the novel took place. So we did that, and then we collaborated again for the new release, which just comes out on the 22nd today.
That's awesome. When Till Death first came out, I had it on my Kindle and it was open to the cover, and my now 11-year-old son Noah walked by and he said, "Oh, that looks like Monsters Inc." Is that kind of 1950s kind of noir-y kind of intro, and
that's cool.
That the kind of intro song to Monsters Inc. And I said, yeah, I think that probably has that same kind of vibe.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it is. I meant to tell you that months ago and forgot. But so you also put out a story, Ledgetown, the end of last year. Tell me about Ledgetown, because that's completely different from Till Death.
Yeah, it is. When I was writing, they kind of did an open call for people for a project that was called Apocalypse Weird, and I think some of your back episodes talk about that a bit.
Yep.
So I got selected. In a lot of ways, I am Sam Rockwell when it comes to writing. I'm just like, okay, let's try this, and it works. I got included in the project, and before my novel ended up coming out, we tried a couple of different things. We were going to try to write like a crowdsourced NaNoWriMo novel where we were all going to write a full book and publish it in a month's time, and it was going to be 10 or 15 authors. And I had the lead part of the story. I was kind of setting it. And so I set it in the world I was going to write in, which was post-apocalyptic Oregon that kind of was Western. And so the 5,000 words that are Ledgetown was supposed to be the start of that story. And the project got scrapped and ultimately shut down. But I still had the story, and I thought, well, I'm going to attach this to Nick Cole's Weird World and put it out there. And it's gotten received really well. But it's odd because it's two distinct audiences, and the people that really love Till Death don't necessarily like Ledgetown, and the same goes the other way around. One is a happy-go-lucky, father knows best type story, and the other is a darker Hitchcock meets The Searchers type story. And not everybody digs those two things. And Till Death kind of crossed over a little bit into a romantic comedy audience, and so they're not looking to read a shoot 'em up.
Gotcha. I think that's something that a lot of authors struggle with is bringing the audience from one book over to a different genre that another book is in. And some folks will tell you never cross the streams.
Yeah,
never,
I hear that.
And I don't know that I buy that. I know a lot of authors that just write in 18 different genres, and they just blast it out there, and people follow them. Some people, maybe a portion of the audience follows over to this book, and a portion of the audience goes the other way. But have you had any problems with people that just say, I bought Ledgetown and I was expecting Till Death, and now I'm mad at you?
Yeah,
have you had any of that?
I haven't run into that. I got one reviewer. And this is where, when we talked about reviews, the first reviews for Till Death were great. The very first review on Ledgetown was a 1-star from someone that was looking for a Louis L'Amour Western. And I was like, what's this?
Yeah.
I got that. Mostly, I think people like the story for the storytelling, but they want another Till Death, or they want another Ledgetown if they're reading Till Death for the first time after coming from that. But I try not to worry about it too much. I know that there is a conventional thinking, and hey, these people are wiser than I am, but I've never been one to make smart decisions all the time. But there's a conventional thinking that you stick to one brand or one genre and you put out pen names for everything else. But my feeling is that individually, I'm the person that would read these different books. I can read Till Death, and I can enjoy that. And then I can turn around and read like The Bleak December by Kevin Summers and enjoy that just as much. I can read
Never heard of him.
The Dark Tower and Dune, and then I can read an upbeat, happy, snappy comedy, and I like it all. And I gotta think, and I think that today, the way our media is so broad and diverse, I think there's a lot more people like that. There's still those people that will only read their genre, but I think a lot of people are happy to kind of sample this and that. They're happy to watch Friends and then go watch Breaking Bad, and it doesn't hackle them.
Well, the truth of the matter is that none of us are these one-dimensional characters. We all like a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Right.
You know, I have a writing playlist on my computer that I play when I'm writing, and as I'm taking on a new project, I'll add new music to it, and I might have Prince come on 1 minute and then Willie Nelson the next.
Yeah.
I'm people like different things, and they like it for different reasons, and I've always thought that when we treat our audience like they're not grown up enough to appreciate different nuances of things, that maybe we're doing a disservice. And I understand the marketing aspect and all that, but I just think that people can appreciate more than one thing.
Yeah, I think so, and I don't know if it's held over from the days of when traditional publishing ruled the earth, but you look at other media streams, and it works. I mean, Steven Spielberg did Schindler's List, and he also did Jurassic Park, and I like both of those movies.
Sure.
And I'd never think, well, no, I can't watch Schindler's List because I only like dinosaur movies. Right. It doesn't work that way, but we kind of treat it as if it does in the writing world.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe one of the keys to that is communicating with your audience.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe if the audience understands who you are, they'll be more forgiving or more apt to follow you to a new genre, because they say, I don't necessarily like cowboy stories or cowboy stories with zombies or whatever, but I know Jason. And I know Jason's not going to steer me wrong.
Right.
And I know that even though the window dressing is different on this, that it's going to be a welcoming living room on the other side, because I know Jason.
Right.
I think maybe that's the important thing today, when is that we stay in communication with our audience and assure them that we're going to deliver the kind of story they expect.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's a great thought. And like you said, communicating and then being honest. When I released Ledgetown, I was honest enough to say, this isn't Till Death, this is darker, it's more serious, and kind of give people permission, for lack of a better word, permission not to buy it if it's not their thing. I make sure to say there's another Till Death on its way, and when I talk about Till Death, I also make sure to update for the readers who enjoyed Ledgetown what's going on with the bigger, fuller companion novel for that. But you have to be able to be honest and communicate those things. I think where you go wrong is when you kind of try to steal sales, where your audience isn't going to like something, but you lead them to believe that this is more of what they've come to enjoy you for, just to get a few quick sales, and that's obviously short-sighted.
Right. Well, the old saying is that you can shear a sheep 4 times a year, but you can only slaughter it once.
Uh-huh.
If you're dishonest with your audience, they're going to see it, and they're not going to trust you on the next book.
Yeah.
But at some time, people will be very forgiving if you're just honest with them, and let them know that you're not trying to dupe them, but this is just another side of your expression.
Yeah, right. Just about having integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, the day we're recording this, and this is going to come out on Friday the 22nd.
Right.
On Friday the 22nd, you release Till Death 2. And it's called Second Impressions.
Yes.
The cover has that same feel. It's the same title font, but instead of having Sam sit on top of the title with the ghost, this time Sam is running gun drawn with a damsel in hand. What is that all about?
Yeah, so that's Sam and Amelia, and in this story, Sam finds himself on the run. There's some violence in Till Death, and I think that I like to have repercussions for violence versus just violence for the sake of it. It's nothing graphic, but and I don't want to spoil anything, but Sam's on the run now from how he won over the bad guys in the first book, and Amelia is his secretary and love interest, and she's right there with him. So we decided we wanted to kind of capture up that relationship between Sam and Amelia. I think is what allowed what was really just a funny noir detective story to cross over, and so when Mike Corley and I talked about what to do, we just knew that we wanted to have them front and center on the cover and kind of demonstrate the chase and danger that is throughout this book.
Excellent. Where did the idea for a follow-up come from?
Really, I had a full story in my mind, but I wrote Till Death, I think like a lot of first-time authors, saying, well, it's out there, and we'll see what happens. I know a lot of people say that you should write your full series and then sort of release them every few months, and there's some good marketing sense to that, but I honestly didn't know what else I would write. I didn't know if that would be the only book I ever wrote. But when I wrote it, I started to receive reviews and really get emails and messages. I've gotten more messages and emails than I have reviews, which is a little frustrating because it's a small percentage of people that have actually purchased the book that have ever bothered to review it, and that's just the author's bane. But that was something that kept coming up, is I just loved Sam and Amelia's story. And for me, that was fun to write because I just sat back and thought, okay, what did it feel like when I was first courting my wife and we were first getting to know each other, and the excitement of finding someone that you adore that actually likes you too. And so I wrote that down, and people wanted to know what was next for Sam, sort of like, well, there's going to be more cases, right? He's got to develop his relationship with Amelia, so what's going to happen? And I said, well, I know what happens. And I started writing it.
I interviewed R.A. Salvatore on the show. He's will be on the show next week,
Nice.
and we were talking about the sheer volume of follow-ups that he's written, and I asked him, when you write all of these sequels, how do you, how are you as prolific as you are, and two, how does it not drudgery that you have to start a new book every so often and go through this process all over again to continue the story. And he said, oh, no. Sequels are not like writing first books. It's like you've come to know these characters, and you just pick up the story where it left off, and the world is already built. The characters, you already have their base character, so to speak. You know how they're going to behave. Now it's just putting them in a new situation and watching what they do. Was it like that with Till Death for you?
Yeah, it was totally like that. In fact, my early draft, I had a little bit of and here's what happened, and then I thought, well, people are probably reading this because they've read the first book, and so I'm just going to get right into it. And so it was a lot easier. The characters are there, and it starts to be like an old glove. You just know what's going to happen, and you know who the characters are, and you come up with these situations. And I think that's the point where people talk about just sort of watching to see what your characters do. I think in writing a sequel, that's when I really saw it happen. In the first book, I didn't know how the characters were going to develop, but in the second book, I knew them pretty well. They were friends, and I could go back and kind of visit them and say, well, how would they react here? How would they react there? And so it was a lot of fun. But he's spot on, and obviously he is. He's RA, but that's absolutely right.
Right. So what is in store for Sam Rockwell? First off, what kind of predicament do you get Sam into with Second Impressions?
So at the end of the first book, he overcomes a plot to kind of bring about the downfall of the United States. So this plays up heavily with the Cold War agitation, and so the main bad guys are Soviet agents who are looking through espionage to topple the bourgeois democracy, the shining beacon of freedom that's the U.S. of A. And Sam manages to save the day, but there's repercussions for that. The Russians aren't too happy. So the book begins with him surviving an assassination attempt, and then his bosses, who happen to be angels that are in charge of returns or in charge of the ghosts, are perplexed. They didn't see it coming, and they're worried. And so they kind of put him on the run and have him solve a case that's been a thorn in their sides down in San Francisco. So he leaves from Tacoma, Washington, which is where the book is primarily set in book one, and moves to San Francisco. And then the diverse plot strings start to come together, and it puts a nice little action romance, and Amelia's there to kind of keep that spark of interest alive for people that like the personal side of the story.
Does it ever scare you to write around such iconic times and situations. You know, when you're dealing with the Cold War, you're dealing with the tensions between the USA and Russia, and you know you're playing with actual history.
Yeah.
Does that ever scare you? Do you ever get intimidated by crafting the story that's placed in times and places that everybody knows?
Right. It doesn't. I'm a big fan of history, and I read history for fun, and so I studied up on the period, and I think that there's two ways that you can write a period piece, and these obviously aren't exhaustive, but in my mind, what I see a lot of times is there's people who write a period piece, and I mean ultimately the plot's the plot, and there's going to be a story no matter where it's set, whether it's in the future, in the past, there's going to be a plot. But when you write a period piece, there's a tendency, I think, to either pull back the curtain and reveal the ugliness of the time period and sort of say, well, here's what this was really like. Here's what it was really like to live in the 1700s. Here's what a privy was really like. Here's what it was like to be a woman in 1300 Ireland. You can write that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Or you can write a period where you're taking an idealized vision. And the 1950s are interesting to me because I think they're part of sort of American culture. You have an optimism coming out of World War II. You think about how our nation was before the war with the Depression, and then every family having someone out there fighting or knowing someone out there fighting. And then the boys come home, and it's how are we going to live our lives? You know, these boys who went off to war at 17, 18 years old are now in their early 20s, and they're looking to start their family. And there was a tremendous optimism that led to a huge boom during the 1950s economically. But that was also contrasted against the fear of nuclear holocaust and the Soviet dominance and all those things that we kind of look back at distantly. So I could have made it harsh and drawn out a lot of the real life ugliness from that time. You know, Jim Crow existed in that time. There are a lot of things that aren't pretty. It's not a perfect time period. No period ever is. But I think taking the Walt Disney route and saying, let's remember kind of maybe an America that never was, and playing off the nostalgia and allowing communism to be straight up completely evil and America is completely good, and tapping into that feeling about the time period makes it fun to write. And so I didn't go in with any trepidations. It's written just like if a movie were to have been released in 1952. That's the feel of the book. Yeah.
Well, it's fun to read that too. You know, I think we're all inundated with the reality that our good guys are not always good. Our country, our leaders act not always in our best interest.
Right.
And that things are multi-layered, mm-hmm. And sometimes it's fun just to imagine. That the good guys are good and right. that the bad guys are bad, and that makes for a great setup. You know.
Yeah, right. There's enough cynicism, I think, in the world.
Yeah.
For me to be able to skip putting it into my book.
Absolutely. Is Second Impressions a pun that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think it'll come out. It's one of those stories where everything is not what it seems at first. So Gotcha. It worked out pretty well. Initially, I really shied against using the word second in the title, but
I think it's great. I won't ask you to spoil it. We'll all be looking for what the subtext is there.
Yeah.
You also released a story just a couple of weeks ago in Daniel Smith's Tales from the Canyons of the Dead, number 3. Mm-hmm. We mentioned Daniel a minute ago. He's a great friend of both of ours. He's doing something really cool with some of these. I don't even know what you call it. They're like mini anthologies or kind of that pulp magazine from the past. What was your story like that you submitted for that?
Yeah, actually, that was a republication of Ledgetown. That's how you can get Ledgetown in print.
Gotcha.
Because it was just a good pulp story that fit the genre. Right. But what he's doing is really neat. It is like those old, even the old comic books, the Strange Tales and things like that, where every month or every couple of weeks you get this collection and you just start turning the pages and you dive down into these fantastic worlds That's exactly what he's doing with his releases. It's just, here it is, here's a bunch of, just go down the rabbit hole and read this and enjoy yourself, and then put it aside and another one will be out.
Yeah, I have a story come out in his next one, number 4, that is a straight up Twilight Zone story.
Yeah.
Or is it whatever his next one is?
I think it's 4, yeah.
And just it was so much fun to write, to just, kind of put all of the typical stuff aside and say, I'm just going to write a straight up weird story that, that's just a total just messes with your head. So
Oh, that's cool. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned a guy earlier. I had to Google him to figure out who he was. Kevin Summers.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah. So apparently you guys are doing something together. What's up with the Literary Outlaws?
Yeah, and this is just an example of how much of a pro Hank Garner is, because he's actually been a guest on the show. But we decided. So Kevin and I think we met through Apocalypse Weird. I met a lot of really amazing writers through Apocalypse Weird, yourself included. And so that's one lasting thing I like about that project. But we got to talking. He would always post stuff about Bret the Hitman Hart, and I grew up really loving wrestling, and so we started instant messaging back and forth, and kind of developed a friendship. And so he's a farmer living in Virginia that writes books, and I'm an office worker in the Pacific Northwest that writes books. And on the surface, you might think we wouldn't have anything in common, but we kind of click and just got on well. And we thought, hey, why don't we just do a show together? It's a good way to kind of talk to people we like, and we enjoy talking, so why not record it? So we talk to people we like about writing or whatever else comes in the minds, and the focus is kind of just that idea of being a literary outlaw, being someone that either through your craft or through the way you put your work out, you're bucking the traditional publishing norms, which really every indie writer is. So we've had you on the show. That I missed that interview, and Kevin didn't want to reschedule. But we've had Mike Corley on the show to get the illustrator's perspective. We've had editors on the show, and so it's just time we get together and talk. And people seem to enjoy it. And the main thing is we enjoy it ourselves. We enjoy talking to each other. We enjoy interviewing our friends, and so it's working out to be a fun side project.
Oh yeah, and all jokes aside, Kevin Summers is one of the most talented writers I know, and just a stand-up guy. I love him to pieces.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's wrong about Star Trek being better than Star Wars, but otherwise, a good guy.
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody has quirks that we choose to overlook, but
right. That's what makes the world interesting.
It is. But he's a Yankee. But that's a whole other thing.
He's like a transformer, He kind of tries to play both sides of the fence.
He does, and those people scare me a little bit, But anyway, So doing the podcast, do you guys put it out weekly?
Yeah, we just put out a new episode every Friday. Actually competing against my show. After you listen to my show, you can go over to literaryoutlaws.com, and we have a really fun interview with Michael Bunker.
Awesome.
That's out on the 22nd. But yeah, every week, and really we're just talking to our friends. It's just a good time and a good conversation. Not as focused, I think, as Geeks of a Certain Age, which is my one of my favorite podcasts right now. Not as focused as that, but certainly the feel of let's talk about writing, but also let's talk about other stuff if the conversation goes there.
The fact that Geeks of a Certain Age is so focused is 1000% Chris Porto.
That's not surprising.
If I were the editing helm on that show, it would be 4 hours long every week. But Chris wrangles it together, and I'm way too much squirrel, and But
I was lobbying Chris.
Yeah.
I said, Chris, if you need a Star Wars correspondent that you can just have show up and have a nice little Lando Calrissian opening, and then I'll tell you what's going on in the Star Wars universe, or solve an argument about Star Wars. Man, I'm ready.
Right.
I'm ready, Hank.
Right. Oh man, he's a taskmaster. Let me tell you.
He is.
But he's something. So is there a particular vibe to the Literary Outlaw show? Is it just you talking to your friends? Do you try to draw certain things out of people?
Yeah, we do try to draw things out of people. I think that we want it to be interesting for people who don't really care about writing to still get caught up in hearing nice, interesting personalities talk. But we also want to try to get something of value for other writers, and really we're getting it for ourselves. So if we get the opportunity to talk to someone, and I don't know, you probably do this too. If you get someone with a wealth of knowledge on the phone, we try to be discreet, but we also try to needle him or her for the tricks of the trade, and
absolutely.
That's the other part of it.
Oh, you'd be remiss if you didn't. You would, you know.
Yeah, you got to take that shot.
You got to take the shot. You know, that's absolutely. Well, I'm a subscriber to the show. Love what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
I loved your show with Elena Georgie.
Oh, she's so
man,
great.
She is great. She's I've never met anybody that didn't just love her.
Yeah.
And such a phenomenal writer.
Uh-huh.
Just great stuff. So keep up the good work over at Literary Outlaws. And, of course, I'll put links to Literary Outlaws in the show notes, links to your books. Do you have a website where people can connect with you?
I do. It's the highly creative and original website URL, jasonanspach.com.
And that's Onspok.
Well, see, now that's the phonetic way to do it. But this is a nice German name, so it's not spelled like that at all. It's ANS, P like Paul, ACH. So it's pronounced Anspach, just like you spelled it. But then it's German, so they got to change the O's into A's and the K's into CH's. You know how it is.
Silly Germans. Yeah.
Ach.
Well. Jason, thanks for coming on the show. This has been a blast, buddy.
Hank, this is a dream come true. A legit goal I had while I was writing Till Death was I want to show up on the Author Stories podcast. I'm not even making that up. I wrote it down as, here are my goals, and that was one of them, and I've made it.
Well, I'm extremely happy to have you, happy to call you a friend and a colleague, and I am going right now to Amazon to purchase my copy of your new book. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us, and I'm going to go pick up Second Impressions right now.
Thanks so much, Hank.